Welcome back. It is Power Rankings time yet again. This is week 22, so we're about 4 more Power Rankings from the season being done. So that's how close we are to finishing out the season and then finding out what all the fuss is about when we get to playoff time. All right, you ready for number 32? Number 32 is San Jose. Chicago drops 2 spots this week. San Jose has been out of last place 2 weeks in a row. There you go. Chicago's number 32 this week. For the Blackhawks, I mean, they've been fun to watch. Like tonight, if you're a Hawks fan, I can't imagine that game against Canucks was a lot of fun to watch. And, I mean, they're fun, they're not good, is a good way to put it. There's fun moments during their games, although tonight, again, I don't think they had a lot of fun in that one. But in general, they've been fun to watch lately. Number 31 is the Sharks. So the Sharks stay in 31st, second week in a row. And for the Sharks, they did get the win over Chicago as well. So, big part of the reason why they're ahead of Chicago in the power rankings. They beat them head-to-head. And then Chicago gets lit up today. Now, San Jose lost a lopsided game as well, but that was against the Capitals. So, a little bit different situation there. Number 30, dropping 1 spot from last week, Buffalo. The Sabres... Another tough week, and yeah, they get the victory over Vegas today, but in general, it was still a tough week. That 7-3 loss against Detroit. That's a game where at points you could see they could have turned it and won it, but they found ways to lose it. It's something that's been going on with them a lot over the course of this season. So Buffalo, number 30 this week. Dropping 1 spot to 29 this week, Nashville. The Preds... You know, they almost did what I thought they could do, which was lose to Anaheim and beat LA. Just they couldn't find a goal to beat LA, and they had 1 goal against Anaheim. It's not going well for Nashville. The effort's there, there's just no finish. And the goaltending's there, but without the finish, doesn't matter if the goaltenders are playing relatively well. Nashville drops 1 spot this week. Number 28, also dropping 1 spot from last week, Philadelphia, because there's a team that had a very good week. There are some teams that have dropped down this week, and Philadelphia being one of them. Philadelphia clearly at this point just counting off the days until the season is done. I'm going to be interested to see if Tortorella comes back next year. That's where I'm going to be interested. Will John Tortorella come back for another season? It feels like he will eventually be part of upper management in Philadelphia, and maybe they have somebody else in mind for coach next season, but yeah, this season they're just playing out the schedule. Number 27, also dropping 1 spot from last week, Seattle. I know, it's not very creative, is it? The Seattle Kraken also dropping a spot, but at this point in time in the season, a lot of these teams just have poor records. They're clearly not in contention for the playoffs at this point, and it becomes difficult for them to move out of the bottom row in general. And they're, I mean, obviously where they're at and not in playoff spot because they don't have those long runs. Number 26, dropping 1 spot from last week, Boston. So Boston's in the bottom row for the 3rd straight week. The Boston Bruins, that loss against Tampa tonight, that score kind of flatters Boston, to be honest. It ended up being 6-2. It easily could have been 12-13-2. Like, it just... That game was very lopsided. Tampa was clearly looking for revenge from the week before. I think they got it. I think they did. But they might circle back and, smack them a few more times. Number 25, moving up 7 spots from last week, the team that had a good week. Pittsburgh's had a good week. They've won 4 games in a row. I think the moves they made at the deadline worked pretty well. If they made those moves before the deadline, like if they'd added Dewar and Timmins, say 2 weeks before the deadline, we might be having a very different discussion. In fact, if they'd made all the moves they made at the deadline 2 weeks earlier, we might be having a very different discussion about Pittsburgh. They're still not going to make the playoffs. They lost too many games before these guys got there, but if you're Kyle Dubas and you want to be a glass half full kind of guy, this week has definitely been one where, yeah, you can look at that glass half full and go, you know what? Pittsburgh may not be that far off from being back in the playoffs. I know that's going to drive Pittsburgh fans insane, but there's going to be those that think it. So that's your bottom row. Nobody moved out of or into the bottom row this week. But Chicago moves down, Pittsburgh moves up, and everything else stays almost the same. Number 24 this week, dropping 1 spot from last week, the Islanders. The Islanders are having trouble with goal scoring. Not a huge surprise there. The Islanders are now in a position, too, where having sold off Nelson at the deadline, we always had this suspicion they probably wouldn't make it, Now it definitely looks like they won't make it. But either way, they have a game tomorrow against Florida. Who knows? Maybe they secure an upset victory over Florida. I don't think so, because Florida's not going to go out there and play two poor games in a row, are they? At any rate, the Islanders are going to be trying to make that happen. Number 23, switching places with the New York Islanders this week, is Anaheim. The Ducks, still winning here and there. And I do think that if you're a Ducks fan and you're like, should I be excited about next season? A little bit, yeah. This is a team that I think next year you can realistically expect to be either at the playoff line or above it. I think the Ducks are going to be really fun to watch. I'm also glad to see that it appears the attendance at Honda Center's gone up this season from where it's been. That's great news. I know that Anaheim fans will support the team. I've seen people complain that, California. But once the team starts winning again, I know fans will come back. I know that's part of the criticism, but it's the way things are, especially with ticket prices being as they are. Number 22, and the first of some big drops this week, Detroit. Detroit dropped 7 spots from last week. They're number 22. And in all honesty, it is insane how good they looked during that winning streak that brought them all the way up to 11th, I think, at one point, 11th or 12th. And now it's just not there. And so now they're down to 22nd. So, yeah, Detroit shoots themselves in the foot. They were in the driver's seat when it came to a playoff spot as recently as, 3 weeks ago? And now, nope. Since Four Nations, it's been an ugly picture for Detroit. And we'll see if things get any better. Tomorrow they've got Vegas, so probably not, but we'll see. Number 21, also a big dropper this week, dropping 9 spots from last week, is Columbus. Columbus, it seems it's kind of fallen apart for them as well. What I do wonder with this too is, so if Columbus falls apart down the stretch and all their numbers go south, does that mean that Makar just wins the Norris Trophy? Because Werenski won't get nearly as much consideration if Columbus fades down the stretch. That's going to have a big impact, I think, on Norris voting. The belief, too, is that Quinn Hughes has missed too many games now to end up in the hunt for that award. The most games he can play now is 68. So I would guess it's Makar's, right? If Columbus can't turn this around. Number 20, dropping 2 spots from last week, St. Louis. They did get the win today against Minnesota. They're keeping themselves in the hunt. What's helping them, too, is that the teams that they're chasing aren't playing fantastic hockey. So for St. Louis, the hope is still there. They only drop a couple of spots, and honestly, I would not be surprised if they have a good week coming up. Let's see. Tomorrow they're at home against Anaheim. That should be a game that they should be able to win. So that's always what I kind of look at is when I'm doing watching the games. I look at which teams are playing which teams, and I go, okay, this team's ahead of this team on the power rankings. So if my power rankings are accurate, this team should win. And then when they don't, you see Columbus and Detroit fall the way that they have. Number 19, moving up 1 spot from last week, the Rangers. The Rangers are in a playoff spot right now. Now, there are other teams chasing them that have at least a game in hand. But the New York Rangers, I think, would be a very dangerous first-round opponent as a wild card. I think this would be a very dangerous team. If Washington wins the East and in the first round they're against the Rangers, I think that series goes to 7, and I think it'll be absolutely fantastic if that's what we get. So the New York Rangers are trending in the right direction. They're number 19 this week on the board. Number 18, dropping 4 spots from last week, Calgary. The Flames, scoring's an issue. It is an issue. And while I've seen a lot of Flames fans saying, hey, Wolf could pull us into the playoffs all by himself, but with just the goaltender, they're not going to win come playoff time. That's a problem. So the Flames have to find some goals between now and playoff time, and they also have to be concerned because they did not have a fantastic week. The Canucks have now passed them, and so now the pressure's on in Calgary to, get on a little bit of a run here because Utah and St. Louis are right behind them. Utah hasn't come up yet, have they? Number 17, moving up 5 spots from last week. Yep, the Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks, and that's a new puck I got of theirs. So, yeah. Number 17, so they move up 5 spots from last week. They had a good week. I don't know if the loss against Dallas woke them up, because that game against Dallas, they looked listless at parts of that game. But they played well against Calgary when they needed to, and they got the victory. And tonight, they look like a far better team than Chicago, which I understand Chicago's down here, but for Vancouver, playing better than your opponents is something they've struggled with at times this season. So Vancouver rounds out the bottom 16 on the board. There are a couple of teams above the playoff line that are here, meaning there are a couple of teams that are below the playoff line that are above the bottom 2 rows. Number 16, dropping 3 spots from last week, Minnesota. The Wild just, tonight's loss against St. Louis, they just don't have offense. Without Eriksson Ek and without Kaprizov, this team is a shell of what it could be. And I feel bad for them. I do. Because Minnesota right now is clearly not looking like a playoff team. And I don't think there's enough time left for them to actually fall out of the playoffs. But, I mean, I've talked a lot about St. Louis and Utah now. Well, they've played at points. Could it happen? It could. I don't think it does. I still think Minnesota ends up in the playoffs. But what chance do they have in the playoffs? If you watch that game against the Blues tonight, it was a tough watch. Number 15, moving up 6 spots from last week, the Montreal Canadiens. Yep, Montreal's back in the top half of the board. Montreal is one of the bewildering teams in terms of they'll have a great 10 games, then they'll have a lousy 10 games, and then a great... And right now it feels like we're in the middle of one of those great 10 games again. So Montreal finds themselves in the top half of the board, and they are right below that playoff line. They are right there. I would not be surprised to see Montreal make it. Just going to say right now, Slavkovsky, Suzuki, Caulfield, that line's fantastic. Montembeau's giving them very good goaltending. And I think Montreal could be dangerous come playoff time too. So if the Rangers and Montreal were the wildcard teams, that would be crazy. The problem is, of course, then you've got Ottawa there as well. So the race in the East is still pretty strong. Number 14, moving up 3 spots from last week, New Jersey. They lost against Pittsburgh, yes. Meaning that they did not move up as far as they were going to before today's game. So if they'd won that game today, they would be higher than 14th on the board. But they are still 14th. They've moved up this week. And so the question becomes one of what next? Can they get that cushion increased? Because Columbus has fallen off, but now the Rangers are coming along here. So yeah, New Jersey's really got to figure this out. I don't think they want a one and done in the playoffs, even if they don't have Jack Hughes. I think they want to show some progression. Number 13 on the board, moving up 3 spots, Utah. Utah's sneaky. They have sneakily crept their way up the board. They are now in the top half, and I don't think I'd want my team to play theirs in the playoffs. Like let's just say if Dallas was the division leader. I know they're not, but if you follow along, I would not want to see Dallas and Utah in the first round. I'm pretty sure Utah would knock out Dallas right now. Because Utah, there's something about this team that they've got something going on, and it might be easy to overlook because they're below the playoff line, but they're not that far below the playoff line. And honestly, yeah, it's been interesting to watch. Now, they did lose against Seattle. They can't afford to have many more games like that. But yeah, Utah 13th on the board. Number 12, dropping 4 spots from last week, the Oilers. The Oilers are picking a bad time of year to start looking like they need some help because the trade deadline's passed. Edmonton needed wingers at the deadline that they didn't get. I think they needed to do something to change things up either on the blue line or in net. And so what we're left with is a team that I don't know if the Oilers are going to be able to get it done. And I'm not sure what happens if the Oilers go out in the first round, which could happen. Right now, it looks like they could be playing on the road against the Kings in the first round. And the Kings have played them how many times? The odds of them beating the Kings again, it's rare. I can do videos on like teams that have played against each other in the first round over and over and over again. And it's something that's not new to hockey. It's happened many times. But eventually, the team that's lost a bunch wins one, and the Kings might be due. Number 11, dropping 2 spots from last week, Toronto. The Leafs are also picking the wrong time. I even saw an article, was it Sportsnet today, that was talking about how Toronto doesn't look like a contender? True. There's a reason they dropped so far last week, and it's because when they were up against really good teams last week, they just looked like the second best team on the ice. And this game tonight against Ottawa, they were the second best team on the ice, which isn't great because there's only 2 teams on the ice. Toronto is really flirting with fading down the stretch, which, I mean, now Tampa's past them. Tampa's ahead of them for second place. And if it's another first round exit, I have to think this is a complete disaster. And something would have to change. And I don't think you can bring Marner and Tavares both back if that's the case. As if they're not going to do it. Right? Maybe Marner goes to market, but yeah, these Leafs need a change. They need a big change. Number 10, moving up 9 spots from last week, Ottawa. So the biggest mover is the Ottawa Senators. I'm wearing the old, and this is, of course, the Scooby-Doo eyes puck, and I've got the S, their secondary logo that they wear now, which isn't that. Either way, Ottawa is playing really, really good hockey. Ottawa's having the best run they've had since the last time they made the playoffs. And this is a team that's going to be dangerous come playoff time. They really are. So it is a lot of fun to watch Ottawa go on this run. I've been waiting for this for a very long time. And I'd kind of given up hope, to be honest. By the 6th week of this season, I was like, they're not going to make it again, are they? And during that losing streak, it kind of felt like that again. But they've got it together. Things are going well. I understand too, Ullmark's been great, but they haven't needed Ullmark to be great. They've been finding goals. They've been playing well defensively. Ottawa's playing a really good all-around game. Number 9, and moving up 2 spots from last week, the Kings. The LA Kings, good week. When they're at home, they have very good weeks, and which is one of the reasons why Devils fans should relax a little bit too. Most of their remaining games are at home, although the last time I talked about the Devils, their home record and road record were very similar. But anyways, the LA Kings have played really well at home, and they did get a win tonight over Nashville. It wasn't pretty. I don't think anybody's going to say that was a pretty game. But they got the win. They got the points. They're ahead of the Oilers. Yeah, the Kings are in good shape as we get ready for the playoffs. And are they due? So we move into the top row. So people will argue about these picks, I'm sure. Number 8, dropping 1 spot from last week, Colorado. This top row is made up of teams that are playing really well. Colorado is playing really well. They are, 7-2-1 in their last 10 games? They're playing quite well. I just felt like there was a team that passed them this week. It is not that Colorado's playing poorly. It is not that Colorado's having issues. If anything, I think what we've seen is that McKinnon might have surpassed McDavid in terms of player in the NHL. And once the season's done, especially once the playoffs are done, I think we can have a bigger conversation about McKinnon versus McDavid. So look for that once both of them are out of the playoffs or one of them wins the Stanley Cup, and then we can compare the two this summer. Because there's always the chance that Edmonton puts it together in the playoffs, and there's always a chance Colorado could win this season as well. Number 7, moving up 3 spots from last week, and they've moved up 7 spots over the last 2 weeks, and that's Carolina. The Canes are playing really, really well. So if you're looking for a team that going into the playoffs is playing well, I would point to Carolina, but then there's the other voice saying, hey, last year from January 1st until the start of the playoffs, Carolina was the best team in the league. They didn't go that far in the playoffs. They weren't out in the first round, but they didn't go that far in the playoffs. So Carolina, I mean, you feel better with them being hot than being cold, and the winning streak's great. So that's why they passed Colorado. Just that Carolina's got this big winning streak. They've been playing really, really well, and so I felt they passed Colorado this week. Number 6, dropping 1 spot from last week, Vegas. So little minor changes in this top row. And really, it is somewhat nitpicky with this, but losing against Buffalo, it causes a bit of a drop. It's a shootout loss. I didn't think they played overly poorly in that game. I think they lacked focus at points, which is unlike Vegas, but maybe their lead atop the division's getting to be too big. I don't know. They just didn't seem to be as motivated today as the Sabres at points, which is odd because Buffalo should just be relaxed more than anything else. Maybe that's what I was seeing. But yeah, Vegas is number 6 this week. Number 5, jumping past Vegas, moving up 1 spot. So these teams switch spots, and that's Tampa. Tampa Bay, the way that they went into Boston and just asserted themselves, that's impressive. And I understand, too, Boston's not a playoff team. They're not playing particularly well. But outshooting the Bruins 40-12 in Boston at TD Garden, that doesn't happen very often. So that was impressive by Tampa. We'll see what they can do the rest of the way, but I mean, they're going to be right there. They absolutely could chase down Florida. It is possible, as crazy as that may sound, and it would be very entertaining if they did, to be honest. I love the Battle of Florida, which brings me to number 4, Florida. The Florida Panthers, number 4, because I felt like the loss they had against Montreal and just overall play this week, I felt like the other two teams that were behind them move up just ever so slightly in the race for first place on the power rankings. So Florida drops a couple of spots. It's not a big deal. People always make a big deal over it. I'm not sure why. But yeah, Florida number 4 this week. It still means they're a contender. In fact, if I was talking about which teams I view as contenders, probably the top row at this point. I think any of these 8 teams could go on a run, could win the Stanley Cup. I love parity. It makes for a much, much more interesting race. And it should make for more interesting playoffs as well. Number 3, moving up 1 spot from last week, the Washington Capitals. The Caps did suffer a shutout loss against the Kings, which helped the Kings, but I didn't feel like that necessarily hurt Washington. And then in San Jose, they were focused. They beat San Jose. They did it with relative ease, and that's kind of what you want to see. You don't want to see them struggling coming out of that game against the Kings. So it didn't have any impact on them. They just shook that off, so they didn't get penalized on the rankings this week, and they're up to number 3 on the board. Number 2 this week, also moving up 1 spot from last week, Dallas. Yep, we had the battle for first place last night, and Dallas came out as the second best team on the ice, meaning they're second best on the board. They're number 2. But Dallas, I think the most interesting thing to me is Rantanen. What kind of impact is Rantanen going to have? And if Dallas loses early in the playoffs, first or second round, there will be a lot of discussion about the Rantanen acquisition. Because Stankoven looks really good in Carolina. And I don't know if I would make that trade if I was Jim Nill. I don't know if I would. I honestly think I would have looked at the asking price for Rantanen and say, you know what? I like what we have here in Dallas. Stankoven's a really good kid. I don't feel like giving away first-round draft picks. So personally, I wouldn't have done it, but Jim Nill's made some really good moves, and so we'll see how things go. But Rantanen's the key guy to watch, I think, the rest of the way for Dallas. Let me know your thoughts. Meaning number 1 this week is Winnipeg. The Jets have been number 1, we're at week 22. They've been number 1 for at least the last 4 weeks. You can do a quick check on that. Let's see. Winnipeg's been number 1. 1, 2, 3, 6. 6 power rankings in a row. 6. I always get told that the power rankings are a jinx, and that if a team is number 1, well, you can bet that they're not going to be number 1 next week. The Jets are immune. They're completely immune to any jinx that might exist. I've done videos on their very good runs that they've had, and that hasn't jinxed them either. So yeah, Winnipeg right now, I think the best team in the National Hockey League, though Dallas, Washington, Florida are all right there with them. So fun. The one thing to keep in mind is that Vegas is the highest ranked team out of the Pacific, and so that would lead to questions about, the Pacific and its strength, because you've got Central, and then of course Florida's the top team for the Atlantic, and Washington easily the best team out of the Metro, where the Carolina Hurricanes are 7th on the board, but I think they're still a full 12 points behind Washington. It's a lot. So there you go. You're all caught up on the power rankings for another week. And after the power rankings are done at the end of the regular season, we'll all wait around to complain about my power rankings in October. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It is greatly appreciated. I will talk to you again soon.